Welcome back, everyone. This week we're going to be discussing a very revolutionary and novel idea that the Rebbe discusses in connection with this week's Parsha, Parsha's Vayeira. For some background, Parsha's Vayeira oftentimes coincides with the birthday of the fifth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab. And there's a famous story of the Rebbe Rashab that was made public by the Rebbeim, which goes like this. When the Rebbe Rashab was a little boy, around 4 or 5 years old, that's how the story goes, he went to his grandfather, the Tzemach Tzedek, to get a blessing for his birthday. When he went to his grandfather, he started crying. And his Zaidi asked him, "Why are you crying?" And he said, "I just learned in Chumash, I learned in this week's Parsha, that Hashem showed himself to Avram Avinu, Vayeira Elav Hashem. And that's why I'm crying. Why is it that Avram Avinu got to see Hashem, but to me Hashem does not reveal himself?" And that brought this boy to tears. The Tzemach Tzedek responded to him and said, when a Jew, a saintly Jew, at 99 years old, decides he's going to get a bris milah, to circumcise himself, he's worthy for Hashem to show himself to him. That's the whole story. And the Rebbe spoke about this many years, but I want to focus on one specific talk, printed in Likutei Sichos Chilek Tesvav, where the Rebbe asks a question. Why is it important detail in the story that the Rebbe Rashab was 4 or 5 years old? Just say, when the Rebbe Rashab was a little kid, he went to his grandfather and started crying. Why is it important to know his exact age? Or we're not even really giving his exact age. We're just saying he's either 4 or 5. So the Rebbe begins developing this idea as follows. There's a rule in halacha, and brought in Kabbalah as well, that a child below 6 years old is not yet roi l'chinuch, is not yet capable of understanding Torah properly, or not yet a proper student and pupil to be educated. And that's across the board. Above 6 years old, there's different levels. Some kids are smarter, some kids are less smart. But until 6, they're at a certain tier, an equal tier, that they're all not considered shaykh to chinuch. So, says the Rebbe, when you hear the story of the Rebbe Rashab crying because he couldn't see God, we might think that this story is only relevant to the Rebbe Rashab as a kid because he's a Rebbe. Normal kids, it's not going to bother them that they can't see God. They're busy with other things, playing tag and getting candy. To think that this is a story that's relevant to everyone, that's not possible. This is a specifically saintly boy. Comes the Rebbe and says that's why the story was said when the Rebbe Rashab was 4 or 5 years old. And we make that and we highlight that detail to show that we're talking about the Rebbe Rashab before he was capable in chinuch, before he was considered a proper student or pupil, having been developed. He was at a playing field at level with every other kid out there. And if the Rebbe Rashab was able to be bothered by the fact that he can't see God and God doesn't show himself to him, then this must be a relevant lesson to children. And the Rebbe says this is actually a very revolutionary idea, to believe that children could be taught and could be brought up with to be bothered, why does God not show himself to me? And to be bothered with a deep yearning for truth and authenticity, and to connect to Hashem, to connect to the truth of the world and follow his mitzvahs. This is so novel that Judaism until now seems to say differently. The Rambam, in his halachas and his laws of chinuch, says that children generally should be taught shaloi lishma. They're not able to care about what's right because it's right. So when they're doing the right things, give them candy, give them egoism, give them nuts or prizes, because that's what's going to talk to them until eventually, when they're older, teach them to try to love the truth because it's the truth. But the Rebbe says, based on the story, that nowadays kids are different. Nowadays kids could be taught, have the sensitivity and yearning for truth, and they could be taught to want the truth because it's the truth already from a young age. To be brought up to want to see God, to want to see Mashiach, to want to see God's ultimate light and reality just shining to them in this world. And until then, they're going to be bothered. And there's a way of cultivating. This exists in children, and we could cultivate it in them. If we don't see that in the children, says the Rebbe, the problem's in us, and we are educating them wrong. The problem is not in the child, because this exists in children these days. A fascinating idea, and very novel idea. We could perhaps connect this with what the Rebbe says at the last printed mimer, what everyone learns before Gimel Tammuz, that the Rebbe gave out, the last edited mimer called Vata Tetzava, where the Rebbe says that there's we live with a certain type of Mesiras Nefesh these days in America. It used to be Mesiras Nefesh meant giving up your life for God, but nowadays the Mesiras Nefesh that Jews experience is that we're kassis because we don't see our Ein Sof. We are crushed because we don't see God's ultimate light. And this is such a perspective shift from the way people oftentimes see kids these days. Because usually we look at children around and say, look at how spoiled they are, look at how anxious they are, what's the problem? Life is so good these days, and yet kids are so spoiled, kids just aren't happy. And that's one way of looking at it. But the Rebbe, as we know how much he believed in children, told us that we could see in children the exact opposite. Perhaps they're not accepting the status quo. Perhaps kids are rebelling because they're seeing past the bluff of their parents that are just living a Judaism that is cultural, that is just doing it for the wrong reasons and not doing it because they are experiencing a deep, intimate connection to Torah and to Hashem. And if kids are seeing false Judaism, they will reject it, not because they're shallow, but at the exact opposite, because they want truth. Kids are anxious these days, not because of a chisara necessarily, not because they lack, but because they taste on the peripheral how good and how true life could be, and I just don't have that. And even if you give me money, and even if you give me prizes, maybe that used to do it for children, as we saw from the Rambam, but these days that doesn't do that for children. Children want truth, and children want God. And if we're not giving it to them in a real way, or we're just giving it to them culturally, or just do this because our parents did it and you did it, and this is the way our family is, back in the day maybe we accepted it, but children these days do not accept it. And if we see children that are just being raised sarcastic and cynical, that means the issue is with us. We're not bringing out the truth of them, or we're snuffing out their innocence, or selling them a shallow view of reality. But this is such a beautiful and empowering way of seeing children, and you see it work. These days kids could be on fire, we want Mashiach now, and you see them singing it with an emes, and crying to their parents, why don't we get to see the Rebbe? And we hear from our parents or grandparents that they got to see the Rebbe. And where is this in the child? Why do you want to see the Rebbe? You could watch videos. What is it in you that is yearning so much for a connection to the Rebbe, that is looking for Mashiach, that is davening so innocently? And this is just the new reality of children that we could see, and we could view all of their challenges. When we view their challenges in this perspective, when we see this in our children, it actually becomes more of a reality. And the lesson that we could take from this story, and the way it relates to this week's Parsha, is to believe that children these days could want to see God just because they love Him, and because they love what is true and real, and they want to see that and connect with that in a deep, deep way, in a way that all filters are removed. And then comes the answer. Now that we know kids could be bothered by this, kids could also handle hearing the answer. That when a Yid, a tzaddik, at 99 years old, decides to get a circumcision, in other words, decides to peel away the layers of reality, decides not just to play victim to this question, but tries to actively remove the falsehoods of the world, and to pierce through the veils, and to connect to Hashem, challenge one comfort zone after the other comfort zone, and to try to peel away the layers of a false world, never settling, and to try to proactively search for this truth, they will find it. The Tzemach Tzedek wasn't just saying why Avram Avinu was able to find it. The Tzemach Tzedek was saying that children these days can live this way as well. That we could demand from our children, they're not weak and feeble, as some also think, but they are very strong. And this is a whole perspective shift. I don't think I'm expressing it enough. Instead of thinking that kids are anxious, weak, and feeble, the Rebbe is saying that they are extremely spiritually sensitive, want truth, and are strong enough to hear the answer, that we could be proactive initiators of a new reality to the world. They could be bothered what the Rebbe Rashav was bothered by, and they could do what Avram Avinu was doing at 99. Instead of saying that they're spoiled and just they're not made of the same stock as they used to be. That's true, but not because they're weaker than us. Perhaps it's because they're stronger than us. And our job is to believe that into them, to see that in them, and to not snuff their flame or snuff their innocence, or to sell them short, but to be able to fan this, and when we see an anxious child, to be able to realize perhaps it's coming from a deep yearning to connect to Hashem, and that they're just not feeling comfortable in a shallow reality. When we're seeing a kid that's misbehaving or calling out his parents' bluff, to see that this kid's not just being chutzpahdik to be chutzpahdik. As the Rebbe said, kids these days are chutzpahdik because they were demanding that we live more true. They're demanding that we live more spiritual and more aligned with Hashem. And the more we see this into our children, the more of a reality it becomes. Just to finish with the story, there's a beautiful story of the Rebbe out of Fabrengen one time, or by Kaishal Bracha actually. There was a chazan, Tzatskis, with his daughter, and he would sing sometimes Nigunim by the Rebbe, and his daughter was sitting there singing next to him. And the secretary said it's not appropriate for a little girl to be singing in front of men. So they told the Rebbe, should they do something? Should they tell her to stop singing? And the Rebbe turned to this girl, made eye contact in the middle of this Kaisha Bracha, and went like this to start clapping with her. And if you see the videos, the Rebbe stops to Kaisha Bracha completely, watches this girl and starts clapping with her. And then this girl, instead of singing, starts clapping with the Rebbe. And then the whole 770 starts clapping. And instead of telling this girl who's so involved in singing a niggin to quiet down, it's inappropriate, the Rebbe didn't lower her flame, didn't lower her innocent gesture of holiness. The Rebbe just channeled it towards, we're not going to do singing, but stopping the whole Farbringen, focusing on one little girl very seriously, very earnestly, and turning the singing, which might have been inappropriate in the moment, to clapping. But not by saying that she's doing something inappropriate, by noticing that this is stemming from a deep, holy place, and looking to channel that out into reality. We could be machanech our kids and our students this way, and bring up the next beautiful generation of Jews. Have a great Shabbos.